Cool. All right. Everyone's gone quiet, which means it's time for me to be not quiet. Hello, everyone. My name is John Manning. I'm the Narrative Technologies lead at Secret Lab. And this is using automated story planners for augmented narrative. Woo! Yeah. Thank you. So hello, everyone. So in case you don't know me, I'm part of Secret Lab, where we work on a few different things. I'm lead on Yarn Spinner, which is a fairly popular narrative tool. I work on Night in the Woods, where I did the dialogue system, amongst much else. And also I work on I Feel Fine, which is a new title that is kind of a demo game for Yarn Spinner, and we announced it last week, and you can see it on Friday at PAX. So that's awesome, cool. That was my only plug, I promise. So let's talk about a problem in narrative design. Creating content for stories is a work-constrained thing. So our ability to give interesting and complete stories for our game worlds is constrained by the amount of content that we can produce. And this means a lot of secondary content that is either dropped or has to be cut or lacks in depth sometimes compared to main story points. So one solution is simply, well, just write more. And that's fine, people do that, that's how most open world games work. But here's another potential solution: computer-supported storytelling. So with a computer-supported workflow, it's possible to have the computer take on some of the load of story content generation. However, ensuring that a story works or makes a kind of narrative sense is not a strong point of computers. It's barely a strong point of human beings. Now, one thing I want to get ahead of before I get properly into this talk, this is not like a how to make the AI generate your story for you. Fuck image generation. What I am going to talk about is using narrative planners to help you build stories. So to give you a bit of background on what a narrative planner is, I'm going to introduce just a few basic things about what planners are in general. Then we'll bring that over to the narrative side, and then we'll look at some examples. So a narrative planner can be thought of as a piece of software that can perform narrative puppeteering. So it is directing multiple agents over the course of time throughout a story to get towards some kind of goal. A single thing is in charge of all of the actors in the story. This is compared to, for example, a simulation where each agent is on their own trying to reach their own personal goal. So the puppeteer in this case is like making them all work together in a way that makes narrative sense. Now this actually allows for very cool conflicts and cooperation to occur in the story in a way that's hard to induce in a simulation, which can lead to more interesting stories. So, a little bit of history. Computers telling story. From basically the jump, everyone was going, wow, these computers can produce text. If they can produce text, that means they can tell stories. Some of the first attempts were in the 1960s. So this is a generator from a researcher named Grimes. This is actually the only surviving piece of output from this program. We don't know how it works. We just know that at one time it produced this. We only know as much about it as we do because a researcher named Ryan in 2017 tracked down the guy and asked him, how did you do this? And his reply was, I don't know. But what it was a grammar generator. Basically, if anybody here use tracery or things like that? No one's raising their hand? That's a shame. Tracery's awesome. Basically, it is a grammar system. You basically give it patterns, and it slots stuff into patterns. Most Twitter bots, for example, run on a version of tracery. It's great, and it's able to produce stories. Or rather, it's able to produce one story, because it's able to swap out things like who's the main character. Which, okay, fine, great, okay. 1977, we hit a program called Tailspin, and Tailspin is something closer to what a planner is doing. This had similar kinds of limitations. It had a limited and hard-coded vocabulary of actions that could be supported, but it was able to produce, you know, a fairly abstract and yet narratively coherent story. And that's good, that's great, that's something. But its limited actions meant that it could only tell certain kinds of stories, the kinds of stories that could fit with this pattern, or it would fail to find the relationships between the elements in the story. Symbolic planning kind of came into its own in the early 1990s, and this allowed for much more flexible and customizable depictions of stories and representations of state, which allows for more complex and interesting stories to be represented. And this also allows for a very, very large possible story state. A planner is able to go from one state to the next in search of a goal. So, what's a planner? Well, a planner is simply a program that is this. Given a start state and a goal state, and given a collection of actions that can change the state, find some sequence of actions that you can take that change the world state from the start to the goal. That's all a planner is. That's all. So a really quick example of like what a plan looks like, outside of narrative, just a plan. So imagine that we're looking at 3 blocks on the table, and they've got names A, B, and C. And they're currently stacked like this. So C on top of A and B are both just sitting on the table. And we define one possible action that can be taken inside this, this block world. So let's define what moving looks like. Moving has requirements and it has effects. So in order to move a block, there has to be nothing on top of it. There has to be nothing on top of the thing we're trying to move it towards. And also, there has to be some other thing below it, whether that's the table or another block. Fine? And the effect of that is block 1 will be atop block 2, and block 1 will no longer be atop whatever it was on before. Okay, cool. We've just defined this action moving. So, how can we produce a plan, or rather, if we asked a planner produce a plan to stack it so it goes A, B, C table, it'll go, okay, the plan, move C to the table, move B on top of C, move A onto B, and it would do just that. So we'd move C onto the table, we'd move B on top of C, great, and then shift across, we'd move A on top of B. So what we're looking at here, this list of actions is a complete description of how we go from the initial state to the goal state. Now, in 1999, Young realized that you can actually use planning structures as a way to tell stories. So a partial ordered causal link planner is a particularly powerful kind of planner because it's able to work backwards from the goal state to the initial state, which is actually often much more efficient, and also allows you to, you can tweak this algorithm to create collaboration, conflict, and actions that people want to take but have to abandon. So, the thing that I'll be looking at in some detail today is a particular partial order causal link planner called Glaive. This is by Stephen Ware at the University of Kentucky, and it's great. I should also point out, Glaive is at this point no longer the state of the art. There are other more advanced planners, but this one is really easy to work with and also demos quite well. To talk to Glaive, we'll be talking in a language called PDDL. The Planning Domain Definition Language, and it looks a bit like Lisp if you ever use that. But what this is an abstract representation of the way that a story is laid out, the way that actions are laid out, the way that a story state can be described. So here we're defining, for example, 2 actions, travel and excavate. We'll look at these in more detail later on. And we're defining in very, very precise and concrete terms what it means for travel to happen, for excavation to happen. And the output of Glaive are steps like this. Again, quite abstract. This is not a thing that you would show the player, but this can be used to drive a game. So, that was a lot of history and a lot of abstract stuff. Let's take a look at this in terms of an actual narrative that many in the room might have seen. So let's ruin a movie with some formal analysis. We're going to ruin Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, in case you haven't seen this, this is a film about an adventurer in the 1930s finding treasure and defeating Nazis. So, yeah, at this point, no, we're going to go beyond spoilers, I'll tell you that. We're going to go into and out of spoilers. So, the core narrative of this story. Indiana Jones digs up the Ark of the Covenant. Nazis take the Ark off Indiana. They open the Ark. It kills them. Indiana takes the Ark off the dead Nazis and gives it to the US government, and the US government sends it to that vault so their top men can analyze it. So the goal state of Raiders of the Lost Ark is twofold. One is The Ark of the Covenant is in a US military-controlled vault, which, okay. And also dead Nazis, which is like a great situation in general. So, these are two goal states. Let's look at the actual actors in the most reductive sense of this story. We've got Indiana Jones, we've got Nazis, we've got the US government, and we've got the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so those are the things in the story. What actions can our agents take? Well, here they are. Dig up an ark, take items, give items, and open the ark. Okay. So this is literally everything that's required, mostly, to make the core plot happen. I'm ignoring all side plot here. We're looking only at the core narrative. Let's look at the preconditions and effects of these actions, just so we understand them a little bit better. Digging up the ark requires that the ark is buried. Fine. And the effects are the ark is no longer buried, and also whoever dug it up owns the ark. Okay. Taking the ark means, well, first of all, somebody has to own it first, and the effects are the taker now has it, and the last owner doesn't. That's how taking works. If you aren't familiar with what it means to take a thing, then now you know. Giving is actually very similar, in that a person owns the ark and they give it. Now, this is similar to taking, but in a way that it's different in a way we'll get to. And finally, opening the ark. In the movie, when the Nazis open the ark, they all die. In really cool special effects at the time, actually. So when they open the ark, first of all, you have to own it to open it, and the second is you're dead when you do. And also the ark is open. Okay, so let's define some initial state. Remember earlier we had that initial state of the blocks are arranged in a certain way. So in this one we'll have a much more abstract state. So in the initial state of Raiders of the Lost Ark, the ark is buried and closed. Indiana Jones, the Nazis, and the US government are alive. In our goal state, remember, the Nazis are dead, and the US government has the ark. Okay, cool. So, let's run it. I'm going to run the software here. So, and I'm just going to just realize now that I need to really quickly switch over my thing so that I am screen mirroring. There it is. Screen mirror that. Click. Oops. Click. Don't look. Okay, cool. Okay, so, first of all, I'm going to show you what this looks like in the code. So, we've defined quite a bit of stuff. I'm not going to go through all this. This is deeply boring, but I am going to go away. It's fine. So, we define actions. We've seen excavate, give, take, and open. So these are just when I was saying these are the prerequisites and these are the effects, literally that's what I was talking about here, where we define, okay, to open the ark, there is a character, the character has the ark, and the effect is the ark is open and the character is not alive. Fine. Let's run it now. So, great. So what I just did was it found a path through state space, starting at the initial state, finding its way to the goal state, and printing out the actions that are taken that transform states from initial to goal. So what happens here? The Nazis dig up the ark, it opens it, and it kills them. The Nazis then give the ark to the US Army. Okay, so we'll just put this back on screen mirroring. There we go, cool. All right. So, yeah, that's not how that movie goes. What happened? Well, the narrative planner wants to find a path, any path, to the goal. So if our actions and intentions and initial state don't give us the desired path, we're going to need to tweak them. Now, the goal state was this, just to refresh your memory. And this goal state is satisfied by the Nazis open ark, it dies, and they hand it over. So how do we improve this representation of this story? There's two real problems here. The first is that the Nazis give the ark to the US and also they're dead at the same time. That should not be possible. The second is more complex because you might have noticed Indiana Jones doesn't show up in the story at all. Because the path that the planner found that gets us from initial to goal state didn't actually need him. So he just doesn't show up. So we'll solve our first problem, which is being dead doesn't stop you from taking actions. You should not be able to do anything if you're dead. So we'll make it so. We'll modify all our actions. So now, digging up the ark, you got to be alive. Taking an ark, you got to be alive. Giving and opening, you got to be alive. Okay, that's going to prevent the planner from finding plans where a person gets killed and then does anything else. But our next problem is more challenging in that Indiana is not involved at all. In fact, if we run the planner now in this current state, what will happen is that the Nazis will open the Ark and then die, and then the US will just come and take it. And that's, again, narratively, that is completely coherent, but again, Indiana is not involved. So to think about what's going on here, think back to the movie. So whether you've seen it or not, quick refresher, Indiana gets involved in the story because he figures out where the Ark is. And so he goes and digs it up, and then the Nazis come and take it. So why not make it so that you can only dig up the Ark if you know where it is? Keyword in there is where. There's no concept of location so far. We're going to have to add them. So we have to add the notion that a thing can be at a place. So we'll add in, first of all, an action, travel. So travel is, well, again, this is movement from one location to another. So traveler is at location A, traveler has to be alive, we've learned our lesson. And also, A and B can't be the same. You can't travel from where you are to where you are. If you did, then you'd be making an action that just doesn't modify state at all, and you can run the risk of being in a loop. So, next up, there are two locations in the story that matter. There's the US and there's Tanis. Okay, cool. So we've defined these two things. We'll also set up some initial state. So at the start of the story, the US government and Indiana are in the US, and the Ark and the Nazis are at Tanis. Cool. We'll also set up excavation knowledge. So currently, anyone can dig up the Ark. We'll make it so that you have to know the location of the Ark to do it. And finally, also, to prevent Indiana from digging up the Ark of the Covenant in America, we'll also make it so that the digger has to be at the same location as the Ark to dig up the Ark. And finally, we'll modify our initial state very slightly, so now Indiana knows that the Ark is at Tanis. So and also, importantly, the Nazis and the US government don't have this information, so therefore the only person in the story who can dig up the Ark is Indiana. This forces Indiana into the story, otherwise he will play no role. Okay, so we'll do it again. This time I know where the button is to screen mirroring, stop mirroring. Great. Oh, or rather start mirroring. Okay, cool. And we'll run it again. Bam. Okay, so zoom in a bit. Indiana travels from the USA to Tanis. He excavates the Ark. He gives it to the Nazis. The Nazis go to the USA. While in the USA, they open the Ark, they die, and the US Army takes it. All right. Well, look, I can't say it's worse. Okay, so this is a bit weird. But again, this is matching our goal. We haven't modified a goal at all. It's better, but we want to add a bit more stuff happening on with the villains. So we'll make it so that we want to be able to have it so that you have to either have some kind of way to force someone to take a thing from you, force someone to give it to you, I should say, or that they should be dead. So you can't just hand it over, right? And the other thing is, these actions don't make a narrative sense because the hero gives the MacGuffin to the villains, and that doesn't make any sense in terms of what the story is about. Some actions only make a kind of narrative sense if a character wants them to happen. So in the current model, Indiana just gives the Ark to the villains because that's a totally valid path. But it's not consistent with the character because, as he quite famously says, he hates those guys. So we'll set up intents. So an intention is basically a thing saying an action can only take place if it is a thing that one or more characters want, specific characters want. So in this case, giving the Ark has to require that the giver and the receiver want that to happen. Now, want this to happen in this case means there is some sub-goal that the agents involved want to have occur. So for example, both Indiana and the US government in this story want the US government to have the Ark. Therefore, it is compatible for Indiana to give the Ark to the US government, but not to the Nazis. Taking the Ark, however, only requires a single person's intent, which is the taker. That is, if I steal a thing from you, then I don't need you to be on board with that, for that to happen. So, we'll also modify a couple of things as well. We'll also intend that Indiana wants to be alive. That's important because otherwise Indiana might open the Ark himself. We'll also do the same thing for the US government. The US government wants to be alive, and also we'll modify it so the Nazis also intend to be alive. Now, I want to make it clear that intents are not the same thing as goals. Intents are things that characters try to work towards, but goals are the end point of the story. Now, at this point, we've created a fairly large state. This is actually the state that gets fed into Glaive at this next step. So here's all of the facts that are true at the start of Raiders of the Lost Ark. You'll notice that there's no secondary character. The female lead is in this because she's not actually relevant to the plot, turns out. Yeah. All right, one more run. Okay, so whoop, and click, click, mirror. Great. Okay, and we'll run it. Okay, and what do we get? We got Indiana goes to Tanis. Indiana digs up the Ark. The Nazis take the Ark. A couple of things are not executed. I'll come back to this. Nazis open the Ark, and they die. Indiana gets it because they're dead, travels back to the USA, that gives it to the US government, and the US government closes the Ark. We actually never saw that in the story, but it's still consistent. So, and also, I imagine they closed it before putting it in that box. Now, notice a couple of things are labeled here as non-executed. That's because this is actually a feature of what Glaive is doing. Glaive is trying to get certain actors to achieve what they intend to happen. Now, that can be in conflict with the goal. The goal must be reached. We'll always hit the goal. But it's going to have them perform actions that would be like getting them into position so they could have, achieved the goal. But, of course, that isn't allowed to happen because that would make it, impossible with the goal. So, for example, Army wants to travel to Tanis and Indiana wants to give the Ark to the Army at Tanis, but that's not allowed because we want the Ark to be open. And the only way for the Ark to be open and Nazis to be dead is, well, yeah, you saw how it goes. So, all right, click, click, click. All right, cool. So, as we saw, basically this happens. It is the plot of the movie as we are familiar with it. Fantastic. We've just recreated a movie that was released 40 years ago. So at this point, you'll be going, well, that's great, but that's linear media, and also I know the story, and also we had to do a lot of work to recreate a known story. What's the point of any of this? And this is where I tell you about the downsides of narrative planners. And the reason why we don't often, not always, there are some games using them, but we don't often see them in games. The reason why planners are slow and complex, it takes time and care to build the domain. Making the domain interesting makes it slower, and also replanning is required if you want your plans to be reactive. Now, I'm giving you the downers first because I'm going to give you the good stuff later on. So this is basically the answer to the question, well then why aren't we seeing more? And here's why. Planners are complicated. Glaive is actually written in Java. It implements a complex planning algorithm called fast forward. It thinks only in terms of PDDL, that language that you saw full of all the parentheses. And a game is going to need something a bit more optimized and tuned for the gameplay environment. So I'm running this entirely offline in a console. If you want to run this online, you'd need to do something much, much more complicated and implement a lot more stuff. Planners are slow. Glaive is what's known as a state space searching planner. What it's doing is it's walking around the universes of different kinds of plans looking for one that reaches a goal. And this can take a long time to do. It's also very, very hard to know if a plan cannot exist as compared to just taking a long time to find. In fact, this is the halting problem. In fact, one of the biggest problems in playing in general is this. So, yeah. As we've also seen, it takes some time and care to put this together. Kat Manning, who's currently narrative lead at Firaxis, has an amazing quote, ProcGen gives you twice as much content for only twice the work. So, as we've seen, it takes time and effort to build this in a way that will produce interesting stuff. And of course, the larger we make our domain, the more complex it becomes. And the more complex it becomes, the more searching we have to do. And this actually makes it much harder to debug as well. And finally, if you want your agents in your story to be able to react to stuff, then you have to replan, because a planner has to assume that it has perfect knowledge of the entire game state and that any actions that are taken in that state, in that world, perfectly describe the changes to the world state. So if something external happens, like a chaos goblin, aka player, entering your perfect world and changing stuff, then now the plan is not appropriate. It won't work. So you have to replan. But we've already established plans are slow, so we can't do it at runtime. So the solution, of course, is make a lot of plans. Now, it turns out making a lot of a thing is what computers are very good at, but again, it's a thing that you have to keep in mind. So, I've given you all the reasons why they're bad. So what are they good for? Well, to answer that question, let's compare the two dominant ways that we put a story together in games. They can be manually authored in terms of a script, or they can be the emergent result of some simulation. Now, this isn't an either-or. Most games will do both. As you probably, if you've ever made a game, then yeah, you've done both probably. But to compare the salient points here, a script is manually authored by some narrative designer or writer. And because it's manually authored, it's always extremely narratively consistent, or at least as consistent as the author wanted it to be. Thank you. But also, it always reaches a known state because, again, it's predetermined. Now, there might be logic, there might be loops, there might be branching, but again, it is under the control of the person who put the script together. The downside to all of this surety is that it can be repetitive and inflexible. You'll get the same output every time. Like the ending of Mass Effect 3 is always one of the same three, or one. So, simulations, by contrast, are very, very different. They are extremely flexible. You take an agent, you give it rules, and you say, go, see you later. And this can be great for creating surprising outcomes, but it can also mean it's extremely challenging to guide this simulation to a known state. Dwarf Fortress is the perfect example of this. People love the stories that fall out of Dwarf Fortress, and yet, can you imagine trying to make a certain outcome happen in Dwarf Fortress? Ever? Planners kind of occupy a bit of a middle ground between scripts and simulations. So a planner will always reach a goal state. Now, you can define that goal state as loosely or as tightly as you like, but it'll always reach some state that matches your goal. This allows them to be surprising while still being controllable. And also, you can think in terms of high-level character intentions as well. Max Kraminski, who's a narrative proc-gen researcher, uses the term narrative instruments, which is an amazing term. Instruments in the sense of a piano or a guitar, in that you can just play on them and music or story falls out, which is great. So here are some situations where that degree of surprise and control can be worth the additional effort involved in using a planner. Intersecting NPC stories, player quest generation, and background story generation. So let's take the first one, intersecting NPC stories. So imagine a game like Skyrim. Skyrim is a game that is filled with a gazillion small towns. Each small town has a gazillion villages in them, and you want each one to be interesting, or at the very least, consistent. Now, you could script them all, and in fact, games like Skyrim do this, but because there's so many of them, they have to reuse the same script. The baker will always wake up and bake and go to the tavern and eat a meal and then go home, and then repeat that for every baker you ever see in the game. So what we could actually do is use a planner to produce something interesting. Now, NPCs kind of take on the role of acting out non-interactive tertiary stories in these kinds of games. So primary stories are like the game's core plot, where if you finish the primary plot, then the game's done. Secondary stories are the side stuff, literally side quests. Tertiary stories are the stories that happen, but the player doesn't care about them, except if they're missing or if they're broken. Now, the way that we make these not be hard to debug is generally you make them quite simple and non-intersecting. And so NPCs don't tend to interact very often. But with a planner, we can safely guarantee that interacting things will be safe. So let's make a little village. It's going to have some NPCs, they have locations and lives and goals and jobs. And we're going to let them live their lives. So meet Gary and Liz. Their villages are in the village. The village consists of 3 locations: the forge, the tool shed, and the fields. These are locations that can be traveled to by the NPCs. And the tool shed has a pair of blacksmith tongs. I don't know how to do blacksmithing, but I involve it. I assume that like picking a thing up is involved, and it's hot, so tongs. And also the forge is a place where you can do blacksmithing at if you have the tongs. Okay. And the actions that can be taken by these NPCs are travel, picking up an item, putting down an item, and using a forge. Okay, so let's look at a really simple version of this first of all. Let's assume that our initial state is Liz and Gary are at their homes, and the tongs are in the tool shed, and our goal state is all characters have done a job. So a job in this case is perform some kind of interesting task that the player can observe and go, oh look, they're living their little lives. And our goal is, at the end, Liz is at home and Gary is out in the field. Okay, so let's run this thing. Okay, so I'll press the button again. I really should have had like a script that just like does this for me, but oh well. Okay, cool. Great. So let's first of all run this village. Run village. Okay. Cool. And that took a second. You notice that took a full second to find to produce this. Now, this is a whole bunch of like very dense stuff. I'm going to go back to my slides and just describe what's going on here, because otherwise we're looking at code, and nobody likes looking at code, not even me, and I'm a programmer. So, Liz went to the tool shed and got the tongs. Liz went to the forge and did some blacksmithing. Liz went and put the tongs back. Liz goes home. And then Gary does the exact same things. Okay, that's narratively consistent, but not very interesting. You could have scripted that. So, what we can do is we can add some more things that players can do. So currently you can do blacksmithing in the forge, and that's it. Let's also make it so you can harvest vegetables out in the field, but to do that you need the scythe. I don't know what vegetables need a scythe to collect, but these ones do. It's a fantasy universe, don't worry about it. And we'll also make it so that you can eat vegetables, but you need a knife. And to have a knife, you have to make it at the forge. So all of these things are getting more like intertwined. So here's our new actions. We're adding 2 new actions. Harvesting vegetables requires a shovel or a scythe. Yep, call it a scythe. And eating requires that you have a knife and you have vegetables. We'll also modify our goals. All characters must have eaten as well. So this is how we create a bit more richness in these people's lives. All right. So let's do this one more time. I've gotten really fast at this. Good. Okay. And we'll run it. Run village. Cool. Okay. There we go. Notice how that... See, we added more to the domain. It took longer. All right. So, this is a more complicated and detailed thing, but again, I'm going to take us back to the slides so we can more easily perceive this. So, screen mirroring, separate display. Great. Okay. Gary went and got the scythe and harvested vegetables in the field. Liz went and got the tongs and made a knife. Liz goes to the field and took the vegetables that Gary had harvested. Okay. So Gary harvests some more. Liz goes to the tavern, eats the vegetables with her knife. Great. So she's all satisfied, she goes home and puts down the knife first of all. Gary goes to the tavern, remember he's just harvested even more veggies, picks up the knife that Liz just put down and eats vegetables and goes back out to the field. Cool. Already we're seeing more intersecting stories from these NPCs. Okay, let's add a little bit of conflict here. So we're going to add in another utility for vegetables. Right now, vegetables, the only thing that can be done is you eat them and that marks you as having eaten a meal. But what if there's another thing that veggies can be put towards? We're going to add in another action, feeding the pigs. Requires vegetables. You have to give the veggies to the pigs. Now, to make this work in a reasonable runtime, I'm actually going to simplify the domain slightly. I'm going to remove locations and travel, because when I ran this, it actually began to time out. Yeah, so we'll remove travel for the moment, but we'll also talk about feeding pigs. Now, to create a bit of conflict, we had Gary and Liz, our 2 villagers, and Gary and Liz wanted to do jobs and then eat and go home. Let's add our 3rd character, Pig-Obsessed Sam. Pig-Obsessed Sam has a single goal, one goal, feed the pigs. That's all he cares about. So, our goal here is Liz and Gary have eaten and the pigs are fed. That's the only changes we'll make to this. All right. So, let's run our village one last time. So, click, click, click. Mirror, okay. And run village. Okay. Okay, and that produced another slightly more interesting plan. So you'll also notice that we have a couple of non-executed things because we had created conflict in the exact same way as what we had with our Indiana Jones example. Okay, so we'll go back to our slides again, once again, just to make it a little bit easier to pass. Okay, so in this story, Gary gets the tongs, Liz gets the scythe, we harvest vegetables. Gary grabs them and also makes some more tongs. Yes, sure. Liz gets more vegetables, Gary gets a knife, Gary eats his vegetables. So far, this is very similar. Gary puts down his knife, Liz picks it up, ready to have her dinner. Sam grabs the vegetables before she can eat them and feeds them to the pigs. And then, so forcing Liz to harvest more vegetables and then eat them. So we're creating situations where these characters are trying to achieve intersecting and also conflicting goals. We've created a much more rich, much more interesting sequence of events for the player to observe that is not just these independent NPCs who don't actually need to do anything together. In this situation, they have to interact with each other, whether for good or evil. So this is giving objectives to NPCs. Now, so far we haven't involved the player at all. In an RPG, imagine a Skyrim type thing, you'd run this plan by tasking the NPCs to walk to locations and play the I'm scything animation and other stuff. But if you can also make the player a part of this plan as well. Because a planner produces a list of tasks for actors to perform, and we've just talked about how we can use NPCs to make them be seen to do these tasks. But also, you can just tell a person to do a thing in a video game, and they have to do it. So we can use the planner to produce a sequence of objectives. Oh wait, that's a quest. So cool, we just invented quests. So again, agents don't have to be NPCs. Let's throw in a couple more things to our village. So we'll add in the dragon, and we'll add in the player. Now the player is an entity in the story that's special. Only the player can perform certain actions. We'll add in a few more actions, like the NPC can give the player a quest. The NPC wants to worship an idol. The player can defeat a dragon, which kills the dragon and satisfies a quest, or the player can seduce a dragon, which satisfies the quest. But if you defeat the dragon, they're dead, and if you seduce a dragon, then they're alive. Cool, all right. So, one more time. This is the last time we'll do this. We will jump back to our process. Great. And I will... my prep has actually failed me because I realized I'm in the wrong one. Never mind, haha. Okay, so... It's fine. All right, what I will do, though, is I'll show you the output. The output. What this creates is a sequence where NPCs are performing certain actions that cause the NPCs to want certain things. One of the ways they can resolve that problem for themselves is to give a quest to the player, and the player is then given the task to defeat the dragon. At that point, we give that objective to the player, they go and defeat the dragon, which drops the idol that the NPC wants. The NPC grabs the idol, worships it, and goes home. Now, what's actually really cool is if we run this a second time where the dragon starts with the idol rather than not, then what will happen is the NPC will travel to where the dragon is, try and pick it up, but fail because the dragon has it, and then at that point, give the quest to the player. So it creates a narratively coherent situation. Finally, background stories are the third and final use case I'll discuss today. So in a background story, these are the kinds of things that happen in our story universe that the player gets told about but doesn't actually get involved with at all. Maybe they react to the player, but the player wasn't actually participating in it. Because in most storytelling games, the player is the most important person in the universe. Things happen to the player or near the player, certainly. But that can lead to a story universe that can feel a little bit hollow. And so a way that you can resolve this is to have events happening in the universe that the player only ever hears about. And we get the player to be told about them secondhand. So let's imagine that we have some planning situation in which we have actors like the invaders, the town militia, and the town guard. And they can do things like attack the town, attack the port, overwhelm the defenses. Really quite large abstract tasks. We're not trying to simulate the actual individual actions that are taken by like each soldier. We are thinking in terms of large groups of people. Now, that's actually fine for us to do because we never actually have to show this. We only have to make the plan, then tell the player about it. So what I've done is I've taken and built a universe like this, and then I took the paddle output, the actual like code that you saw, and we ran it through a Python script that rewrites it into something that the player could see. So it produced this story. So this is the copy and paste output from the tool, where the invaders attack from the hills, damaging the port. The guard defenders, they are forced to retreat to the city. So are the militia. The invaders go from go to the port and then go to the city where they overrun the militia. But then the guard rallies, forcing the invaders back out. Now, this is a fairly compelling story that you could hear about in the street. And in fact, delivering it to the player in a second-hand way is a great way to basically have the player be told about consequences in the universe. You could actually you could generate this many, many times. This took about 3 seconds to run, and that's fine to run it like 20 times, especially if you vary the initial state. Every time you go, okay, cool. If the initial state is one where the player didn't arrive in time to defend the city, then we'll run this story where invaders came and defeated everything, and then deliver this piece by piece over time so you can be caught up on what's happened in that city that you abandoned. So, narrative planners. They're good. They can be useful. They are not magical. You cannot press the button and get a story. But what you can do is you can get interesting kinds of narrative out of them that can help augment your larger story. So I would strongly suggest that you try them out. Thank you. I have a few, before we go to Q&A, I want to say, first of all, massive, massive, massive thanks to Tim Nugent, who helped me out massively with this presentation. You try writing a GCAP talk while crunching. It's amazing. It's great. Stephen Ware, who wrote the glaive planner that we saw in action. Mark Rydell, who is a person who has basically done enormous works in this. Kat Manning for giving me feedback on this talk. And also Jacob Garby for helping me find certain resources. And with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions. So I think if you have a question, why not come to the mic?
Hi.
Hi.
Great talk, really interesting. I was just wondering, does glaive provide some way of saying, this is not my goal state, but I want this to be true at some point?
So you can't define a thing that is true halfway through, but what you can do is you can feed it a partial plan. You can say, I want the plan to include this action to be taken. Now, that of course reduces the possibilities for plans to be found, but you can go like, I want a situation where
Indiana has
Indiana digs it up in USA. That's actually not possible in this domain. But yes, you can tell it, I need the plan to include this action, or even this subsequence of actions.
And would that reduce the amount of computation time or increase it?
Frequently it increases it, because what it has to do is, rather than when it achieves a plan going, great, here's a way to get from initial to goal, that's good enough, here you are, it has to keep searching until it finds a plan that includes that. Now, it tries to be a little bit smarter by, what if I could prefix the entire thing with these actions first of all, but if that's not narratively coherent with the initial state, then that can't be done. So, yeah, often it will increase the computation time.
Okay, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, you mentioned that performance, or like the time it takes to generate the plan, is a big consideration. And that made me think, are you aware of the goal-oriented action planning algorithm that's the AI behind fear?
Yes, I have. Yes, so I found this as part of the research. One of the reasons why fear was able to make use of a planner in its AI is because its domain is way, way, way smaller. Or rather, not the domain, the potential search space is way, way, way smaller. So one of the things, I'll actually just quickly jump this to a thing here, just to show you what we're looking at. So I'm going to turn this here, jump into the code, because what you can also tell glaive to do is you can tell glaive to, here we go, give me the entire space of what everything can look like So what this is doing here, it's dumped every single possible fact that could ever be true inside this universe. So like, it could be true that the army knows that the Ark is in USA. It could be true, etc., etc. And so the reason why glaive takes so long to come to its conclusions is because it has to search way more. Fear's AI has to only deal in terms of, do I take cover? Where can I take cover? What weapon should I use? So yes.
Yeah, so I was wondering if anybody had tried to use something like that specifically for storytelling.
The closest I can think of is Weird West does some fantastic stuff that makes use of planners. There's not enough for me to be able to say off the top of my head, but at GDC earlier this year, there was a talk called Innovations in Narrative something at GDC. It was like a three-person panel. Worth checking out. I will try, if you follow me on Twitter, which I really now realize I should have had this on screen, it's this. There we go. I'll tweet a link to like that later on. Cool.
Hi.
Hello.
Great talk.
Thank you.
Short. Hi. So just curious, you mentioned that glaive is now not state of the art. What is?
Oh, okay. So Stephen Ware moved on from glaive to his current project is called Sabre. And what Sabre does is, rather than simply modeling the intents of actors, it also models things like beliefs of actors as well. So, for example, you can model in Sabre, Indiana believes that the Nazis know the location and will act in certain ways. And so it creates, like, again, much more like interesting stories as a result of that, because you can think in terms of like theory of mind stuff. It also implements the fast downward planner, which is a evolution of the fast forward planning algorithm. So it's also faster. Unfortunately, it's not available for use because it just hasn't been released, whereas glaive has. So, yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Welcome.
Ooh, hi.
Hi.
This is the first question I've asked of this entire thing. So.
Awesome. Well, congratulations.
Really good talk. Thank you. So yeah, I was just wondering if, even in your own work, or if you know anyone who's looking at adapting this sort of similar technology into generating more reactive world states and less so creating narratives to follow. But the thing that popped into my head was NPC has a goal. The goal is not met. Generate radiant quest or something like that to resolve their goal to be presented to the player, something like that?
Not dynamically, because that's hard to do for the reasons I talked about. No, unfortunately, I don't have a great thing to say, hey, check this out. The one that looks the most interesting, again, is Weird West. Go play that game. It does a lot of really interesting, like, dynamic generation of stories.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Hi. Really good talk. So, although potential tomato rather than question, in your examples, you did a lot of work to create a story that you already had in mind, kind of thing, and encode it in the model, and then the planner found the story that you had in your head.
Yes.
But I guess this is only useful if the planner can generate lots of different stories out of a model, so that you provide one model and it finds multiple stories that you didn't write.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Yes, it is, because all you have to do is modify the goal state or modify the initial state. So like, it is totally possible to produce situations in which, for example, in the Indiana example, like move the location of where the Ark is, or give the Nazis knowledge of the Ark, or create like additional characters who do more things. So yes, it takes a long time to like get to the point where the stories that fall out of the planner are interesting. Once you've got that, though, it becomes way easier to just tweak one variable and get a totally different plan. The other thing that I will say is glaive, by default, will produce and release the first plan that it comes to, but it doesn't have to. You can actually tell it, I want to see like the third plan that also reaches this. So you can say, give me another way to get from this initial state to this goal state. So even without changing anything about the problem, you can still produce more stories. Depending on how complicated your domain is, they may be very similar, like the difference in ordering of travel, but you can produce much more complicated stuff, yeah.
Can I ask that?
Yeah.
While I'm here, are there any guarantees that they're going to be interesting stories, I guess, is the question, because just...
That is the fundamental problem of this entire field.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine the writers of Indiana Jones didn't set out, we need to make a story in which the Ark arrives in the US. They said, we need to make a story in which Indiana Jones meet some interesting frustrations and some
Yeah.
drama happens.
So
we
that's
do that?
actually. I'm sorry to jump on you on that one, but here it is. Okay, so the paper that introduced the underlying algorithm that that Glaive is doing, which thank you, you can download that rather than open it. Okay, cool. Well, maybe in a second this will open and I can open it. Yeah, great, cool. All right. So the original idea behind why Glaive was made was because they went, well, we have narrative planners, but they don't produce interesting stories. How can we create interesting stories? Well, one way a story can be interesting is when it features conflict. And so when the writers of Indiana Jones go, let's make an interesting story, conflict is fairly central to the Western style of writing stories. And so if you can create domains that are able to induce certain conflicts, then it's more likely to be interesting. I don't promise it to be, but basically it's like the skill that you develop is meta writing, which,
Thank you.
yeah. I think, oh no, we have plenty of time. Yeah.
We do have to start just organizing for the next talk.
Okay, could we do one more?
Okay.
Okay, one more quick question.
Okay, I presume that all of those simulations were deterministic, like there was no randomness, you always knew when you ran it.
That's correct, it's always the same.
Can you add randomness to Glaive?
No, not to Glaive, because the way that Glaive problems are defined, there's no randomness to it. That said, the PDDL language does have support for the concept of randomness, just not for this particular planner. So a way that you could do it, though, is you could just say, pick a random number between 1 and 10 and give me the nth plan that falls out of it. So that's a way to create like a bit of randomness while still getting the same state and end goal. So. Yeah. That's not a great answer, but it satisfies, much like our stories.
Okay, great, thank you.
There, thank you very much.